diligencing companies on the AI side? I mean, some of you are technical, some of you don't come from a technical background. What are some practical tips for investors that are really diving in deep on machine intelligence models and need to be able to separate, for lack of a better word, BS from real solid innovations? Either of you on the investor side.
That's a very broad question. I really think that people need to understand, like we've been talking about here, that at risk of a gross oversimplification in terms of an analogy, if you're building a company and that company is a sandwich, AI is a sauce that you put on the sandwich. It does not actually build the core piece of what you're creating. It simply makes it better. And quite frankly, at this point, there's an inflection point that basically means if you're not leveraging AI in what you're building, you're at a huge competitive disadvantage. So to me, the diligence really centers around understanding if what a company is claiming is actually possible. So if someone is basically saying, hey, we take some open source algorithm, we throw out an extremely complicated problem and everything works out, it's probably a bit of exaggeration. If someone understands the complexities that go into data preparation and normalization and understanding that some problems simply are not tractable, then there may be a real business there. But I really defer the diligence to the actual business aspect more than the AI component.
So I agree with that. I also think it depends on the stage. At the very early stage, to be honest, I would look at academic pedigree. There are plenty of consumer companies where that just doesn't matter. You're looking for flashes of insight. When it comes to deep convolutional neural nets and AI, there aren't that many schools in the world that are churning out people on the front line. So that's kind of a box to check. It's not the only, but where we tend to invest would be a little bit later when there is something that we can kick the tires on. And I think echo what Adam said, is you look at the output. I don't really care about the construction of the convolutional neural net or what's going on behind the curtain. I care, depending on that vertical, is that output of value to their customer base. So if we're looking at an AI play in robotics, that's pretty easy to diligence. If you're looking at an AI play in anti-money laundering, again, pretty easy to diligence. We have connections at large potential customers. We'll introduce them and we'll watch and see, are they impressed with the output? If they're impressed by the output, I don't care as much what happened in the black box. And to be honest, if it's really good, I'm not going to understand it anyways.
Fair enough. So specific question. So we notice a huge uptick in micro VCs, first-time fund managers, smaller funds. And when you look at the overall trends in investing in AI and the value of the individual researchers that are at some of these companies, obviously we've seen a large swath of acqui-hires. We've even seen some funds out there, if you look at like a Chris Farmer and what they're doing around tracking tracking engineers as they go to these different companies. Do you think that there's any value in these acqui-hire exits for these smaller funds, and that the industry can sustain itself on $50 and $100 million exits for raw talent coming out of Stanford and Waterloo? Or do you think when that talent turns that a lot of those funds are going to be stuck with companies that are not going to be able to exit for serious dollars to return the fund, and the talent's not going to be worth what it is today?
I mean, I'm an optimist by nature. I think you have to be an early stage investor. So I'd put a more positive spin on it, and then I think these acqui-hires provide a wonderful valuation floor. It's a great dynamic as an investor if you have a chance at an outsized return, and on the downside you can get your bait back and find good homes for the talent that gave it a good shot. So that's kind of what I'm seeing with the acqui-hires, and I really like that dynamic as an investor firm. Can it sustain the industry? No. I mean, I think there was $1 billion in the last few quarters, in each of the quarters invested in AI. So, you do the math. If on average you want a 3x in investment at a minimum over the average, you need to then, start generating $3 billion a quarter in exits. So you're not going to get there with $50 to $100 million deals, but I'd put that positive spin. I like that downside protection.
Fair enough, fair enough.
John,
Yes.
could I just say something on that? We've seen a lot of quick flips among deep learning startups, right? And kudos to the founders and investors who were involved in that. But that's not what's important about AI or investing in AI, right? What's transformative is building a business that can sustain itself by constructing a product that people want because it transforms their businesses down the road, right? So what you see with a lot of these quick flips are very talented people with the right pedigrees who may not know how to build a business or whose instincts may lean more towards research, right, than satisfying clients, right? And I think that the real opportunities are actually in finding that company that combines research with a sense of meeting clients' needs.
I couldn't, if I may, I couldn't agree more. That's a very important point. I like to use the analogy of how I'm an enterprise software guy. So if you look at business applications in the 90s and the early 2000s, they're all forms-based old applications. And if you look at what search came in, the search paradigm came in, and now every application, every business application, if it doesn't have a search paradigm built in, it's just worthless. So when I look at AI and I look at the trends of AI, it's to what Scott said earlier and to what Chris is saying. Is there a compelling business outcome? And then using the Warren Buffett analogy, can you understand why AI is applicable in that business outcome? What does it actually do? And we were talking before this event, and I was just doing a quick quiz. How many people in this room have actually programmed in Lisp? Okay, and how many of us programmed in Lisp before 1990? Okay, Lisp is one of the basic tenets of AI. It's been around, right? Why is it so hot today? And it's because there's a whole bunch of other things that are going on. And yes, AI is a fantastic paradigm, and its time has come. But let's not forget the fundamentals that Chris is talking about, that Scott's talking about.
So, I mean, you see these fundamentals, you see these enabling technologies, everybody's talking about the availability of compute, everybody's talking about GPUs as enabling technologies. What are the non-obvious enabling technologies that either people aren't talking about or we just haven't seen yet?
I tell you one that I think, and Chris mentioned it though, so maybe it is obvious, it's the underlying data. The data is the fuel to this fire. I might add a fifth category for success, which is vertical knowledge. I mean, again, this depends on if you're a horizontal play or a vertical play. But what I tend to see the startups in the Valley fall short on is really understanding the vertical that they hope to change. And I think this is actually quite interesting for the folks then who aren't based in the Bay. If you look at the geographic, the data tables on where AI investment is going, it's much broader than other categories. And I think it's for that reason that it's following industry. I think the Midwest, I think the Eastern Seaboard, there's going to be a lot of activity there. And I do in my role as heading up biz dev at NEA, I talk to a lot of Fortune 500 companies. One of the things I tell them about AI is it's fundamentally different than internet connectivity, where internet connectivity leveled the playing field and made it easier for the startups to compete with them. I think you could argue that AI, the advantage goes to the incumbent because the incumbent has the data if they know what to do with it.
Fair enough.
May I?
Yes, please.
I will take a contrarian view on this. I think data is important, but I don't think data is the big thing. We've had data around. I was working at SAP a long time ago. We had a customer in the largest CPG company. They had a data warehouse which was about 270 terabytes. In those days, it was really huge. They had massive data, and frankly, I would argue that we've got more data than we know what we do. We don't have information. The information is what is the crisis here. But I think the major thing that allows for AI to really become kind of front and center today is distributed computing and cost of computing. When I was writing an expert system in Lisp in the 90s, It would require a Cray computer to be able to run that thing, or it would require a very powerful SGI machine. I can run that for 1/100th of the cost on AWS today and get the answer with 10 times the amount of data. Right, we have more data now, but we had data before too. I think compute and distributed computing, and last but not least, a consumer experience that's easy to build is what's changing the game.
Okay, so let's dissect that a bit. I want to go to Chris on this one with respect to the chips, because you brought this up before. Who's going to win those wars?
Who's going to win the chip wars? That's impossible to say because there's so many contenders out there, some of which are stealth. But NVIDIA's obviously winning now. Intel wants to make a compelling challenge with Nirvana's chips at the end of this year. We'll see if they make it by then, right? Nirvana's a great team, but Intel's had problems getting GPU challengers out in the past. And at the same time, there's a bunch of companies that most people here may not have heard of, from Cerebras, right? DeepFi, Fathom Computing that Playground invested in, who are promising 100x improvements.
So those all end up acquisition targets?
Yeah, sure they do, because there's a lot of big companies who would love to be saving money with their own version of TPUs like Google has begun to do. I just want to get back to your point about the non-obvious components of an AI solution. It's useful to think about what the big data stack is, right? Because AI is just one extra layer. AI is a filter that you add to the big data stack. So if you think of data like a liquid, right? There's a funnel that comes in from a website or from sensors on the IoT. You move it through a pipe like Kafka or Flink or Storm. You store it in a bucket like HDFS, right? And that filter, right? That filter is catching things that are meaningful. In fact, it's that the AI layer gives data meaning. And it gives data meaning much more effectively when the data has been gathered for the purpose of that interpretation. So one thing we see